As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight, Jerry Robinson, founder of Follow the Money and Follow the Money Weekly and Daily on ftmdaily.com, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. He's an economist, and he's been talking around the country and around the world for the last decade on as author of Bankruptcy of Our Nation and other works to talk to people about the risks that are inherent in our fiat currency system and what specific and constructive steps they can take in their own lives to increase their financial resilience. Jerry, thank you for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Oh, absolutely. It's always good to be with you and your audience.
I have to give you a plug because I was just listening to one of your most recent podcasts, which was an amazingly succinct summation of 5 of your key principles or 5 stages of financial independence and responsibility. And it's just really highly recommended. Folks, go to ftmdaily.com and look up Jerry's most recent podcast about the 5 stages of financial wealth management, and it's just very easy to listen to. It moves right along, and you'll just get a real earful. Very inspiring. Thank you, Jerry, so much for that kind of work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you.
And tonight we wanted to talk about a different topic with you, and that is the topic of propaganda. There's been so much talk in the media these days and from government and other leaders and so on talking about fake news and people using that as a criticism to blackball whichever side of the coin they don't want to have affect them. And if you could talk to us about, and we even heard in this last election for the first time in recent memory about foreign intervention in a U.S. election, that kind of thing. So there's significant concern about that. And the tagline of our channel is helping you be aware and prepared. How can you be aware if you can't even trust the information that you're receiving? We talk about that a lot, is how people can turn to more reliable sources of information. You've been looking into this topic, so can you take us into what you consider to be some of the key points about propaganda that people need to be aware of?
Oh, sure. It's a really, really interesting topic, and I think propaganda mostly has been oversimplified by most people, and I think it's just because we don't really hear about the topic except in very negative connotations. So we really don't know what propaganda really is. In fact, if we go back and we do a study, there's some great books that people can read on propaganda. One that I would strongly encourage all of your readers to pick up is an old book by Jaques Ellul called, just quite frankly, it's just called Propaganda. And it's a very important book that helps us understand that propaganda is not really just fake news. Propaganda is not really just false information. In fact, modern men today don't understand the real power of propaganda because they believe that it's easy to detect. They believe that propaganda is composed of tall tales and overt lies. But this attitude leaves the individual modern man easy prey for the propagandist. And so the propagandist is really not trying to lie to the people. The propagandist instead is actually agreeing with the people. And you really can't get propaganda to change somebody's mind. Propaganda can only be used to lead men to action based upon what's already inside of them. So it doesn't really serve to change the opinions of the masses, but it serves to reinforce and intensify the existing trends. I think this is very, very important because what we see today is just a tremendous sea of propaganda all around us. And when we think about propaganda, we tend to think about Nazi Germany, or we think about, the communists, the Soviet Empire, Stalin's Russia and fascist Italy, Mussolini. But it's really quite interesting that if you study propaganda, you discover that it's the democratic governments in which it can have the most toxic of effects. Propaganda is a necessary tool in democracy as a way to course correct. You see, the people are the leader. or they're the ruler in a democracy. If you think back, like a monarchy, for example, or a strong man government where you just have a dictatorship, there's the propaganda there can keep a lid on problems, but it's not really designed to force the people to do something. It's really designed to keep them huddled in their masses. However, in a democracy, there is no strong man, or at least there's not supposed to be. There is no dictator. There is supposed to be rule by the people. Now, I know we're a republic, and we're not talking about that difference between republics and democracies. We all understand that. But as far as the democracy I'm talking about is that it needs propaganda, because propaganda serves to help course correct when the people, who are the rulers, get out of hand. And so it's very important. And in fact, there can be good propaganda. There's sometimes, propaganda can be useful for a very good purpose, but typically it's harnessed for the most toxic of purposes.
In your, why is it something that's of current study of yours right now? Why is it coming up at this time for you?
I think the main thing is that I think Donald Trump, honestly, has shocked the nation. I think that many people today are scared. I think that we have been running our podcast online since 2010. We have been providing a lot of information to people, cranking out a lot of information over the years. And we get all kinds of contact from the people. We'll get emails from across the country and across the world. And I have seen a changing tone in the questions that are coming in. I'm seeing a changing tone in the fear levels that are being raised right now. And I think you have a channel that is very vital today in the fact that you're talking about, reluctant prepping. I mean, many people today, they don't even know the first thing about a go bag. And so it's very important, the work that you do is to continue to help people understand, because people are fearful and they need to take action for their own selves. The problem is that propagandists are not interested in the individual man and seeing him educated and seeing him well protected. They're interested in motivating him to action, leveraging and putting a hook into him, to, finding some common ground with him and then leveraging it for their benefit. This is what the propagandist does. And so in this environment, where propaganda is so prevalent, it's helpful to have a plan of your own. That way you can move according to your own principles. I can't tell you how many people I meet who really have no life plan. Instead, they are literally just being tossed to and fro with the latest current events that come out. And oftentimes, those current events are nothing more than propaganda. So you'll just be a boat floating out in the middle of the ocean with no direction, no rudder, just being tossed about by the waves of current events. That's no way to live. We need to be living intentionally and understanding that much of what surrounds us in this technological age is propaganda and nothing less and nothing more.
I've heard it said that how deep is your river of purpose and of real knowledge and information, that a lot of people who are just skimming and surfing and going with the flow of current trends, what's trending now, what's on social media, etc., have arguments that are a mile wide and 2 inches deep on just about any topic. They've got a quickly formed opinion because it's the fashion, it's the opinion of fashion, and not necessarily one of deep conviction, not one of lasting integrity that's really based on a lifetime or foundational principles. How does that affect a society when an entire generation coming on is been formed that way? And what do people who want to raise their family or their young people in a different direction and maintain their own perspective, not to be swept along by, as you mentioned, if we give over to sort of the fashionable thought process, we're probably just basically giving our will over to an elite, somebody who's got the megaphone, who's got the microphone, and who's basically scripting that response from us.
Yeah, well, to the first part of the question, I think that intellectuals are the most vulnerable to propaganda, and that's because, and when I say intellectuals, I guess I'm probably not just talking about academics, but but people who have voracious appetites for knowledge. And we're those are pretty legion today in the information age, even though like as you mentioned, it might be an inch deep. They're still voracious for information. And so I think intellectuals are the most vulnerable to propaganda for a few reasons. First, they absorb the largest amount of secondhand, unverifiable information. So if you're just constantly seeing headlines on a daily basis, and you're seeing 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 headlines in a day because you're looking through Twitter, well, you are just filling your head with PR crafted language, right? So the more you ingest of that, and the more secondhand reports that you read, the much more vulnerable you are to propaganda. So a guy living in the forest, he's not nearly going to be, as affected as somebody who's consuming a lot of corporate news. Secondly, intellectuals have a compelling need usually to have an opinion about every single important question of our time, and I think that's easy to succumb to that. And I think it's especially true in our day with Facebook and Twitter. Everybody has to have an opinion about everything. And so every question people must have an opinion on. And so when you must have an opinion about everything, and the propagandists are offering their opinions to you constantly, it's easy to simply just take theirs, as you mentioned, not really thinking for themselves. So intellectuals tend to promote propaganda because they have to have an opinion about everything, and they often, as you mentioned, go maybe an inch deep to get their information, like many people do. And then thirdly, I think because we're in a technological age where we are surrounded by mass media, we're surrounded by all kinds of television, radio, billboards, print, motion pictures, and of course you can't leave out the public relations industry, which really in most ways is really nothing more than propaganda, and also online, the whole blogosphere, which is propaganda in many different places. And it's interesting that today in our technological society, because men consider themselves to be so reasonable and so rational, it's almost as if they require or they need propaganda so as to literally separate the wheat from the chaff, and it's something that they almost crave. So it's part and parcel, I guess, of our technological age. It's part and parcel of where we are today. The best way to think about it is the propagandist as an anesthesiologist administering the anesthetic so that the surgeon may operate, without any kind of interference at all. Now to the second part of the question, you had mentioned, how do people live in this? And I think, I can only speak from myself, and I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and so I'm going to view things through that lens. So for those who are not believers, maybe you can just just kind of bear with me as I explain this. But the way that I view it is that propaganda sits upon a base. It has to have a base. Propaganda cannot possibly work unless it has a base. And that base is the pre-propaganda that is instilled throughout people, of course, throughout the public education system. America is largely based upon Dewey's philosophy, very heavily. And so what we see is we see this pre-propaganda base that exists within America. So there's about 4 different things, and we could probably list many. But the first one is that man is inherently good. Man is inherently good. And so the pre-propaganda base always assumes that. So all technology is good. All inventions by man are good. Everything is good. Man is good. Therefore, all of his creative works must therefore, by definition, be good. Well, this flies in the face of a biblical worldview, but that certainly is required for propaganda. Secondly, the second undergirding principle of pre-propaganda that prepares the mind for propaganda is the idea that man, and that his whole ultimate aim in life is his own happiness. So pursuing happiness and all of this, of course, becomes very important. It becomes important in the technological age that men are allowed to promote their own happiness and pursue their own happiness. So this is a pre-propaganda ideal that undergirds, any effective propaganda. Thirdly, you must believe that humanity is progressing. This is a pre-propaganda base that's instilled within children in kindergarten. So things are good. So whenever, you have whenever you see a news story about us, maybe humans going to Mars or whatever, it reconfirms that idea within you that humanity is not going down, that what the Bible says about man is not true, but instead actually man is progressing. And so therefore, whenever the new car rolls off the assembly line, it excites modern man because he senses that humanity is progressing down some path that's getting better. And then, of course, you also have the pre-propaganda base of this presupposition that everything is matter. Much of this stuff comes from the ancient Greek philosophies, and they were revived in the Renaissance, and of course they were really heavily promoted by during the American Revolution and the French Revolution.
Yeah, the Enlightenment, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we return to these ancient Greek ideals and philosophies, and they really inform much of our society today, much more than we realize. And so propaganda is simply leveraging that. So in other words, propaganda will always agree with those things. It will never attack those things. In fact, if you attack one of those four presuppositions, you'll find that all four of them will come back to attack you. The three others will attack you. So it's a very well-knit system that's been created, and the propaganda, in essence, keeps the machine going, so to speak. It keeps man believing that he's progressing somewhere, that he's really going somewhere, when in fact, from a biblical worldview, again, let me express that, from a biblical worldview, it's quite the opposite.
You mentioned the public education in the United States based on Dewey. There's a very eye-opening documentary. People should look up the movie Indoctrination by Colin Gunn with two N's. It's about a homeschool family that travels the country in a school bus for a year, basically investigating the philosophical roots of public schooling. And Dewey wasn't alone. There was also Marx and a bunch of others in there too, whose thinking is also combined in. And it's very eye-opening in terms of what we're just taking in gullibly, unquestioningly. Most people who have their children, catechized by the public school system is what you're being taught to be unquestioning. Another one made me think of the work of G.K. Chesterton, famous writer of the first half of the 20th century, who talked about, basically questioned a lot of things that weren't being questioned by the intelligentsia and universities and so on. And he's not at all popular with universities because he really questions a lot of these assumptions that intellectuals presume. And one of those is the one you mentioned about humanity always is progressing. And the challenge there is that if it's progressing, it must be anything that can be determined as progress must mean that it's towards something that's improving, and ultimately would reach an ultimate perfection. And if it points towards something, what is that which it points towards? And it's very revealing to try to probe people's common, because there is that common expectation in the part of most people, because that's what we've been taught, is that humanity is progressing. And certainly they can point out economic or financial or technological advances. Now you can get a flat screen TV for less than you used to be able to, or whatever. But if you start talking about how do they know that the direction humanity is going is actually in progress, what is the ultimate good that it's leading towards? Very interesting to hear what people have to say about that. Most people have no idea, but some of the other ideals that they'll express are quite revealing in terms of what their real values are. Can you talk to us about why this is a danger? Why must we be concerned about this and be aware of how we're being affected by it?
Well, I think it's again important for individuals simply to know where they are. And again, people who don't have a biblical worldview may have a different view of propaganda. But I think from a biblical worldview, it's very clear that the battle has always been for the mind of man. It's as old as human history. That's always been the goal, is the mind of the human man. And our minds, I think our brains, what we have to prepare for, and this is really what we have to prepare for, is that we're going to see a very big sea change in our world, and we already are. We're in this fourth industrial revolution that has been described by Carl Schwab as this fourth industrial revolution, where now we are seeing many different academic disciplines coming together and finally being connected and overlapping. So for a long time, neuroscience was working all by itself, creating its own documentation as an academic discipline. And in different segments of nanotechnology were working and building out their own documentation for their own discipline. But in this fourth industrial revolution that we're in, we're seeing many of these disciplines now come together and find a connection. And so then they're beginning to overlap, and then new disciplines come out of these. Well, one of the more interesting connections has been the work in the brain. Back in 2010, there was an amazing, astonishing study put out by Stanford University that showed that the human brain had and contained within it more switches than all of the computers, all of the routers, all of the internet connections on Earth combined. This was a staggering discovery by Stanford. They said the brain is much more complex than what we had imagined. And as we see that technology is accelerating, we may look at the brain and say, wow, what a phenomenal thing that it is. But based upon the current trajectory today, experts and technologists are basically predicting that within 10 years, you'll be able to walk into Best Buy, plunk down $1,000, and walk out with a laptop that has the same computing power as the human brain. Now, why this is so powerful and why this is so important is because at some point in the future, the human brain and its capacity will be surpassed. The human mind, by the way, was not designed to move at the speed and think at this scale. We have way too much stimuli around us on a regular basis. Most Americans are myopic because they stare at screens all day. We sit underneath artificial light. We eat artificial food. We have fake money. I mean, everything around us is fake. Our minds and our bodies were not adjusted for this kind of lifestyle. And neuroscientists and technologists are actively seeking methods to upgrade the human brain so that they can better cope with this new environment. So brain implants are the promise to keep our brains apace with this accelerating technological age. This is where you begin to have ethics problems, along with the genetically modified babies and all of this. As a believer, I have some serious ethical problems with what I see being called progress and what I see being called advancement. What I see is a lot of propaganda that is pushing man off of the edge of the cliff. It's no different in the economy. They take on far too much debt. They live in some sort of fairy tale land where they can constantly borrow and never pay anything back. We are surrounded by propaganda. And I think it's important for people to understand that, but then also protect yourself from that. And the way you can protect yourself from it, one of the ways I find is prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation are the most powerful thing because they serve to short circuit the perpetual propaganda that surrounds the individual. When you stop and you take an hour and you pray or you meditate, you stop that ongoing back and forth dialogue that's constantly going on in the human mind, and you're able to stop and short circuit the propaganda. So I think, prayer, I think meditation, I think stopping and short-circuiting that propaganda, turning the television off, looking your family in the face and having, turning off the crackberries and paying attention to human life, is very important because we are slipping into a very bizarre time, and there's a lot of spiritual deception all around.
And a lot of what you're talking about, getting real, is another guest we've had talks about getting real skills, real friends, real money, that sort of thing. And David Morgan also talks about that, about getting real. And this is something that people who are invested in being aware and preparedness are trying to do. Is they're trying to unplug from. They don't want to be a member of the herd, just another school of fish, going in the direction that we're being led and guided to go, but in the one that's going to be right for them and right for their family, to take care of their family. So where do you, in addition to prayer and meditation, and also sounds like connecting, unplugging from the screen and instead putting your hands and eyes on real things in the real world and real life, to get grounded and to get a sense of reality, is there any other specific guidance that you offer people who want to make sure that they're aware of how influenced they may be by external propaganda, and how instead to kind of take charge of that for in their family and in their home life?
I tell you what, for people who are really interested, we did a 1-hour lecture on this topic, and it's now online. People can watch it completely free. It's just it's online right now for anybody to watch. It's ftmdaily.com/propaganda. So ftmdaily.com, like follow the money, .com/propaganda. And there you can watch a hour-long video where we talk about a lot of things related to propaganda, and we do provide some conclusions. Although I'm not really. I think at this point it's more about creating the awareness of what it is. I think the applications might be different according to each person.
Yep. And one fellow we're going to have on again next week, who is Brad Harris from Full Spectrum Survival, talks about the necessity of getting your family into a habit of, in his case, they use camping as their way to get out and really learn skills. It's person to person, face to face. It's dealing with real things that were in God's creation, dealing with the real world. You can work on survival skills, you can work on self-sufficiency, you can work on challenging and confidence building, but it's dealing with real things, real challenges, real experiences building together as your family time. I know we, as a homeschool family, had tons of opportunities to have those kind of real experiences. And even now, we have some grown children still living at home in college. And when we have weekly dates with them, we say, hey, what shall we do? If anybody starts to say, hey, let's just watch a show, let's just watch this or watch that, almost always somebody else says, let's do something real. And it's quite refreshing and re-energizing to me to hear that coming from the next generation of saying, let's do something real instead of getting on the screen together.
Me too. That's very refreshing to hear.
So, Jerry, just thank you so much. I know our time is short this evening, and we wanted to have you on here quickly to touch on this topic. We'll put the link to your movie on propaganda that you have on your ftmdaily.com site on our description of this video for people to click on if they want to watch that. And we'd love to have you back again soon to talk about those 5 pillars or principles of stages of maintaining and achieving and maintaining financial independence, because a lot of what we were programmed to do was to fit in as cogs in the system and to just line up, go to work, take your paycheck and put your money in a 401k, whatever, in the stock market. And your information says that may not be the best programming you receive. There's better options out there. So we'd love to have you back and talk about those topics.
Oh, I'd love to. It'd be a great time.
Thank you, Jerry, for joining us again on Reluctant Preppers.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you so much.